The Siege of Smolensk lasted almost a year between 1632 and 1633, when the Muscovite army besieged the Polish-Lithuanian city of Smolensk during the war named after that siege. Muscovite forces of over 25,000 under Mikhail Borisovich Shein began the Siege of Smolensk on the 28th of October. Polish garrison under Samuel Drucki-Sokoliński numbered about 3,000. The fortress held out for nearly a year, and in 1633 the newly elected Polish King Władysław IV organized a relief force. In a series of fierce engagements, Commonwealth forces gradually overran the Russian field fortifications, and by the 4th of October the siege had broken. Shein had become besieged in his camp, and began surrender negotiations in January 1634, capitulating around 1 of March. Background: in 1632, Sigismund III Vasa, the King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania, died. Russia, having recovered to a certain extent from the time of troubles, decided to capitalize on the temporary confusion of its western neighbor. Russia's aim was to gain control of Smolensk, which it had ceded to the Commonwealth in 1618 at the Truce of Juliano, ending the last Russo-Polish War. Smolensk was the capital of the Commonwealth's Smolensk voivodeship, but it had often been contested, and it changed hands many times during the 15th, 16th and 17th centuries. Opposing forces: the Russian army that crossed the Lithuanian border in early October 1632 had been carefully prepared and was under the experienced command of Mikhail Shein, who had previously defended Smolensk against the Poles during the 1609–1611 siege. Estimates of the size of the Russian forces vary, from 20,000 through 25,000 and 30,000 to 34,500, with 160 artillery pieces. However, the numbers over 25,000 give the overall number of Shein's army when leaving Moscow. A part of this army was left behind as garrisons in newly conquered cities as Dorogobuzh, Belar and others. Based on the archive documents, the Russian historian Menshikov gives the initial number of Shein's army at Smolensk as 24,000 men, but indicates that the number reduced to 20,000 by August, when many Russian soldiers left the army to protect their estates endangered by the Crimean Khan's summer raid on South Russia. Compared to former Russian armies, Shein's army was significantly modernized. Dissatisfied with the traditional formations of musket-equipped infantry, the Russians looked to foreign officers to update the equipment and training of the troops based on the Western European model of regulars, dragoons, and reiters. 8 such regiments, totaling 14,000 to 17,000 men, comprised a part of Shein's army. Commonwealth forces in Smolensk were composed of the Smolensk garrison, strengthened by the local nobility, which formed a Pospolite Russini force of about 1,500 strong. The city's fortifications had also recently been improved with Italian-style bastions. By mid-1632, the deputy voivode of Smolensk, Samuel Drucki-Sokoliński, had about 500 volunteers from Pospolite Russini and 2,500 of regular army soldiers and Cossacks. Siege: Shein began the Siege of Smolensk on the 28th of October. The Muscovite forces constructed lines of circumvallation around the fortress. Using tunnels and mines, his forces damaged a long section of the city wall and one of its towers. Russian heavy artillery, mostly of Western manufacture, reached Smolensk in December 1632, with even heavier guns arriving the following March. After a preliminary artillery bombardment, Shein ordered an assault, which was repulsed by the Polish defenders. Nonetheless, the siege was progressing. Smolensk's fortifications were being eroded. and the defenders were suffering heavy casualties and running out of supplies. By June 1633, some soldiers started to desert, and others talked of surrender. Despite these difficulties, the city, commanded by Deputy Voivode Samuel Drucki-Sokoliński, held out throughout 1633 while the Commonwealth, under its newly elected King Vladislav IV, organized a relief force. The same officially sanctioned a declaration of war and authorized a large payment for the raising of a suitable force in spring 1633. The intended relief force would have an effective strength of about 21,500 men and would include 24 Karagius of winged hussars, 27 Karagius of light cavalry, also known as Cossack cavalry but not composed of Cossacks, 10 squadrons of raiders, 7 Lithuanian petty horse regiments, 7 large regiments of dragoons, until the 20 regiments of infantry. Over 10,000 of the infantry would be organized based on the Western model, previously not common in Commonwealth armies. Meanwhile, Field Hetman of Lithuania and Voivode of Vilnius, Krzysztof Radziwiłł, and Voivode Gosiewski established a camp about 30 kilometers from Smolensk, moving from Orsha-Debarjo and later Krasna. By February 1633, they had amassed around 4,500 soldiers, including over 2,000 infantry, and were engaged in raiding the rear areas of the Russian besiegers to disrupt the logistics. Hetman Radziwiłł also managed to break through the Russian lines on several occasions, bringing about 1,000 soldiers and supplies into Smolensk to reinforce the fortress and raising the defenders' morale. By the summer of 1633, the relief force, led personally by the king and numbering about 25,000, arrived near Smolensk. They reached Orsha on the 17th of August 1633. By the first days of September, the main body of the relief forces approaching Smolensk numbered around 14,000. The Russian army, recently reinforced, numbered 25,000. Only when Cossack reinforcements led by Timofey Ondrenko and numbering between 10,000 and 20,000 arrived on the 17th of September would the Commonwealth army gain numerical superiority. The Cossacks under Ondrenko and Marcin Kazanovsky would raid the Russian rear lines, freeing the Polish-Lithuanian units under Radziwiłł and Gosiewski to join the effort to break the siege. Vladislav's brother, John II Casimir, commanded one of the regiments in the relief army. Another notable commander was the field crown hetman, Marcin Kazanovsky. King Vladislav IV, a great supporter of the modernization of the Commonwealth army, proved to be a good tactician, and his innovations in the use of artillery and fortifications based on Western ideas greatly contributed to the eventual Polish-Lithuanian success. He had replaced the old arquebusiers with musketeers, and standardized the Commonwealth artillery, both to great effect. Commonwealth's cavalry, including the winged hussars, significantly restricted Russian mobility, forcing them to stay in the trenches. In a series of fierce engagements, Commonwealth forces gradually overran the Russian field fortifications, and the siege reached its final stages by late September. On the 28th of September 1633, Commonwealth forces took the main Russian supply points, and by the 4th of October the siege had broken. Shein's army retreated to its main camp, which was in turn surrounded by Commonwealth forces in mid-October. The besieged Russians waited for relief, but none arrived, as Commonwealth and Cossack cavalry had been sent to disrupt the Russian rear. Some historians also cite dissent and internal divisions in the Russian camp as responsible for their inaction and ineffectiveness. The Tatar invasion threatening the South Russian border borderlands was a contributory factor, with many soldiers and boyars from those regions deserting the Russian camp to return to protect their homes. Some foreign mercenaries also deserted to the Commonwealth side. Shein began surrender negotiations in January 1634, and by February they were in full swing. The Russians finally signed a surrender treaty on the 25th of February 1634, and on the 1st of March they vacated the camp. Under the surrender terms, the Russians had to leave behind most of their artillery but were allowed to retain the banners after a ceremony in which they were laid before King Vladislav. They also had to promise not to engage Commonwealth forces for the next 3 months. Shein's forces numbered around 12,000 at the time of the capitulation, but over 4,000, including most of the foreign contingent, immediately decided to defect to the Commonwealth. Aftermath. After the victory at Smolensk, the Commonwealth army moved towards the fortress Bular, but the siege became a fiasco. The negotiations began on the 30th of April and would end with the Treaty of Polyanovka in May. Bibliography